This is Games Untold, Love is Power by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. That night in Prague. Nothing in this place was infinite except for Jameson and me. The morning after. I wasn't worried about him. Worrying about Jameson Winchester Hawthorne was about as useful as trying to argue with the wind. I was smart enough to know that there was no sense in shouting at hurricanes or worrying about a Hawthorne with a love of Hail Mary passes, semi-calculated risks, and walking right up to the edge of incredible drops. Jameson had a habit of landing on his feet. Avery, Orrin announced his presence, a mere courtesy considering my head of security was never far away. It's almost dawn. I can have my team take another sweep and... No, I said quietly. I couldn't shake the feeling that Jameson wouldn't want me looking for him. This wasn't hide and seek. It wasn't catch me if you can. Every single one of my instincts said that this was something. It's been 14 hours. Orrin's voice was a military kind of calm, brisk, matter of fact, always prepared for the worst. He disappeared with no warning. He left no trace behind it. It happened in an instant. We have to consider the possibility of foul play. Considering nefarious possibilities was Orrin's job. I was the Hawthorne heiress. Jameson was a Hawthorne. We attracted attention and sometimes threats. But deep down, my gut was saying the same thing it had been saying from the moment Jameson had disappeared. I should have seen this coming. Something electric had been building in Jameson for days. An unholy energy, a powerful drive, a secret. Memories flashed rapid fire through my head, moment after moment after moment, from the day I'd stepped from in Prague. The spire, the knife, the clock, the key. What are you up to, Hawthorne? You have a secret. What is it? Give it an hour, I told Orrin. If Jameson's not back, then you can send out a team. When it was clear that my bodyguard, and sometimes father figure, wasn't going to argue with me, I made my way to the foyer of our luxury hotel suite, the Royal Suite. I took a seat in the chair made of crushed red and black velvet and stared at a wall that wasn't just a wall, my mind working its way through this puzzle for the 100th time. A decadent gold mural stared back at me. Where are you, Jameson? What am I missing? My eyes found the well-masked seams in the wall. A hidden door. Its existence was a reminder to me that Jameson's deceased grandfather, Tobias Hawthorne, had once owned this hotel, that the Royal Suite had been built to the exacting, puzzle-obsessed billionaire specifications. Traps upon traps, I thought, and riddles upon riddles. That phrase had been among the first words Jameson had ever spoken to me, back when he'd been fighting grief and chasing the next puzzle, the next high, determined not to care about anyone or anything. Back when he'd taken risks in part because he wanted to hurt. As I stared at the wall and the hidden door, I told myself that the Jameson of those early days wasn't the same Jameson Hawthorne who'd pushed my hair back from my face the day before, spreading it out like a halo on the mattress. My Jameson still took risks, but he always came back. I know better than to worry about Jameson Hawthorne, and yet... I willed the hidden door to open. I willed Jameson to be standing on the other side of it. And finally, just before my hour was up, it did. And he was. Jameson Winchester Hawthorne. The first thing I saw as he crossed into the light was the blood. Chapter 1. The 3 days earlier. The postcard in my hand matched the view out the jet's window. Prague at dawn. Centuries of history was silhouetted against a hazy gold sky. The dark, swirling clouds above the city a deep purple gray. Jameson had sent me the postcard, a callback to the way his uncle had once sent postcards to my mother. The parallel made me think about what my mom would say if she could see me now. The private plane, the inches-thick stack of documents I'd gone through on the flight, the way I still caught myself holding my breath when the reality of moments like this once hit me with the force of a tidal wave. Prague at dawn. My mom and I had always talked about traveling the world. It was the one dream I'd allowed myself to hold on to after she died. But at 15 and 16 and 17, I'd never let myself daydream for more than a few minutes at a time. I'd never let myself want this or anything too much. But now, I ran my thumb over the edge of the postcard. Now I wanted the world. I wanted everything, and there was nothing standing in my way. One of these days, you'll get used to it. The person sitting across from me on my private jet set, and then she laid 3 magazines down on the table between us. My face was on the cover of every single one. No, I told Alyssa simply, I won't. I couldn't read any of the words on the covers. It wasn't even short language 2 of the 3 were in. They're calling you Saint Avery. Elise lurched a little brow at me. Care to guess what they're calling Avery? Calling Jameson? Elise Ortega was my lawyer, and the foundations, but her expertise went well beyond legal advice. If something needed fixing, she fixed it. At this point, our roles were clearly defined. I was the teenage billionaire heiress philanthropist. She put out the fires. And Jameson Hawthorne blazed. Guess, Elisa reiterated as the jet touched down, what they're calling him. I knew exactly where this was going, but I wasn't a saint, and Jameson wasn't a liability. We were 2 sides of the same coin. Are they calling him Don't Stop? I asked Elisa seriously. Her perfectly sculpted brows pulled together. Sorry, I said in a completely deadpan. I forgot. That's what I call him. Elisa snorted. It is not. A borderline Hawthorne grin pulled at the edges of my lips, and I looked out the window again. In the distance, I could still see the spires disappearing into the gold purple-gray sky. Elisa was wrong. I would never get used to this. This was everything, and so was Jameson Hawthorne. I'm not St. Avery, I told Elisa. You know that. I kept enough of my inheritance that I would literally never be able to spend even a noticeable fraction of it. But all most people saw was the amount I'd given away. By popular opinion, I was either a paragon of virtue or about as intelligent as a sack of rocks. You may not be a saint, Elisa told me, but you are discreet. And Jameson is not, I said. If Elisa noticed the way my lips ticked upward just saying his name, she chose to ignore it. He's a Hawthorne. Discreet is not in their vocabulary. Elisa had her own history with the Hawthorne family. The foundation's work is gaining steam. We don't need a scandal right now. When you see Jameson, you tell him, no puppies this time, no breaking and entering, no rooftops, no dares, don't let him drink anything that glows. Call me if he so much as mentions leather pants. And remember, I'm not Cinderella anymore, I finished. I'm writing my own story now. At 17, when my life had changed forever, I'd been the lucky girl from the wrong side of the tracks, plucked from obscurity and given the world on a whim of an eccentric billionaire. But now, I was the eccentric billionaire. I'd come into my own, and the world was watching. St. Avery. I shook my head at the thought. Whoever had come up with that moniker clearly didn't realize that the biggest difference between Jameson and me, when it came to dares and games and the thrill of the moment, was that I was better at not getting caught. Within minutes, the plane was ready for us to deboard. First, security first, then Elisa, then me. The instant I had both feet on the ground, I got a text from Jameson. I doubted the timing was a coincidence. Very few things with Jameson were. I read his text, and a surge of energy and awe, reminiscent of what I felt like when I looked out the window at the ancient city below, came rushing back. A slow smile spread over my face. 2 sentences. That was all it took for Jameson Hawthorne to make my heart start beating a little harder, a little faster. Welcome to the city of 100 spires, Eris. Feel like a game of hide and seek? Chapter 2. Our version of hide and seek had 3 rules. The person hiding couldn't ditch the phone. GPS tracking had to be enabled. The person seeking had an hour. In the past 6 months, Jameson and I had played in Bali, Kyoto, and Marseille, and on the Amalfi Coast, and in the labyrinthine markings of Morocco. Following the GPS coordinates was never the hard part, and that held true today. No matter how many times I checked Jameson's location, the pulsing blue marker stayed in the same half-block radius just outside of Prague Castle. And that was the challenge. My Achilles heel in hide-and-seek was always how hard it was for me not to lose myself in the surroundings, in the moment, or in this case, in the view. The castle. I'd known before coming to Prague that it was among the largest castles in the world, but knowing was different from seeing, was different from feeling. There was a certain magic in standing in the shadows of an ancient, massive structure that made you feel small, something that made the earth and its possibilities feel enormous. I gave myself a full minute to take it all in, not just the sights, but the feel of the morning air on my skin, the people already on the streets all around me. And then I got to work. Per the GPS, Jameson's location had varied between several points, all of which seemed to be located in the palace gardens, or sometimes just outside the garden's walls. I walked those walls looking for the entry. It didn't take me long to realize that the garden in question was actually multiple gardens, interconnected, all of which were closed, or at least they were closed to the public. When I approached the entry, the iron gate swung inward for me, like magic. I'd meant when I'd said to Elisa on the plane, I would never get used to this. I stepped through the gate. Orrin followed at a reasonable distance. Once we were both inside, the iron gate swung closed beside us. I made eye contact with the docent who closed it. He smiled. I had no idea how Jameson had managed this. I wasn't sure that I wanted to know. My body buzzing with the thrill of the game, I made my way inward until I reached a set of stairs, narrow and steep. The kind of stairs that made you feel as if climbing them might take you back in time. I made it to the top, looked down at my phone, and then looked back up at the surrounding terrace gardens, and up, and up, and up. My brain automatically started trying to calculate the number of stairs, the number of terraces. I looked down at my phone again and took a turn off the beaten path, jogging forward, then turning again. The instant my GPS location brushed up against Jameson's, his blinky blue cursor disappeared from the map. Technically, that made 4 rules for our version of hide-and-seek. The hunt was on. Found you, I said. Once upon a time, I'd been a more gracious winner, but now I relish my victories like a hawthorn. Cutting it close this time, Eris. Jameson spoke from behind the tree that stood between us. No part of his body was visible to me, but I could feel his presence, the outline of his long, lean form. "58 minutes, 19 seconds, Jameson reported. 1 minute and 41 seconds to spare, I countered, circling the tree and stopping when my body was directly in front of his. "How'd you get them to open this place early?" Jameson's lips curved. He turned 90 degrees and took 3 slow steps back toward the garden path. How didn't I get them to open early? 3 more steps and he was on the path. He knelt, picking something up off the stone. I knew before he stood back up and brandished his bounty that it was a coin. Jameson twirled the coin from one finger to the next. "Heads or tails, Harris?" My eyes narrowed slightly, but I deeply suspected my pupils were dilating, drinking it all in. This was us. Jameson, me, our language, our game. Heads or tails? "You planted that." I nodded toward the coin. I had a collection of them, at least one from every place we visited, and every single one of these coins had a memory attached. "Now why," Jameson murmured, "would I ever do a thing like that? Heads, I kiss you," he told me once. Tails, you kiss me. And either way, it means something. I reached out to pluck the coin from his hand, and he let me. Not that I wouldn't have prevailed either way. I looked down at the coin. The outer ring was bronze, the inner circle gold, bearing the image of a castle. On the reverse side, there was a golden creature that looked like a lion. I twirled the coin through my fingers, the way Jameson had through his, one by one by one. I caught it in between my thumb and at the side of my index finger, and then I flipped it into the air. I caught it in my palm. I spread my fingers and looked from the coin to him. Heads. Chapter 3. 40 minutes later, we were on a rooftop. "Sorry, Elisa." I still had the coin. "You could make a wish," I told Jameson, twirling the coin between my fingers again, my lips swollen and aching in all the right ways. I cast a glance back over our shoulders at the gardens below. There was no shortage of fountains down there. Jameson did not turn to look at the fountains. He leaned into me, the two of us perfectly balanced, on the roof with each other play. "What fun is wishing?" Jameson countered. "No game to play, no challenge to best, just poof, here's your heart's desire." That was a very Hawthorne perspective on wishes, on life. Jameson had grown up in a glittering elite world where nothing was out of reach. He hadn't spent his childhood birthdays blowing out candles. Every year he'd be given $10,000 to invest, a challenge to fulfill, and the opportunity to pick any talent or skill in the world to cultivate, no expense spared, and no excuses accepted. I considered leaving the topic alone, but ultimately decided to push back a little bit. In my experience, Jameson Hawthorne liked being pushed. You don't know what you would wish for?" I said, my tone making it clear that the words were a challenge, not a question. "Maybe not," Jameson shot me a look that was nothing but trouble. "But I can certainly think of some fascinating games I'd like to win." That statement was every bit as much of an invitation as heads or tails. Holding back just a bit, just for a moment longer, I pulled the postcard Jameson had sent me out of my back pocket. It was starting to look a little wrinkled, a little worn. Real, the way most people's dreams never were. "I got your postcard," I said. "No message on the back." "How long did you spend trying to determine if I'd written something on invisible ink?" Jameson asked. "Nothing but trouble." I countered his question with my own. "What kind of invisible ink did you use?" Just because I hadn't been able to reveal it didn't mean it wasn't there. Beside me, Jameson leaned back on his elbows and looked up at Prague Castle again. Maybe I just considered writing something and then decided not to. He gave a careless little shrug, a very Jameson Hawthorne shrug. "After all, it's been done." For decades, another Hawthorne had sent postcards just like this one to my mother. Theirs had been a star-crossed kind of love, but real. Like the creases in my postcard. Like Jameson and me. "Everything's been done by someone," I pointed out quietly. Jameson's gap year was 3/4 done. Day by day, I could feel him growing more restless in his own skin. I'd been Hawthorne adjacent long enough to know that billionaire Tobias Hawthorne's real legacy hadn't been the fortune he left me. It was the marks he left on each of his grandsons. Invisible, enduring. This was Jameson Winchester Jameson Winchester Hawthorne was hungry. He wanted everything and needed something. And because he was a Hawthorne, that elusive something could never be ordinary. He couldn't be ordinary. You should know by now, Eris, the words, "everything's been done by someone," sound a lot like a challenge to me. Jameson smiled. One of those uneven-edged, wicked Jameson smiles. Or a dare. "No dares," I told Jameson, grinning right back. "You've been talking to Elisa," he said, and then he cocked an eyebrow. "St. Avery?" Jameson could read at least 9 languages that I was aware of. He almost certainly knew exactly what the world was saying about him. "Don't call me that," I ordered. "I'm no saint." Jameson straightened and pushed my hair back from my face, the tips of his fingers banishing tension in every muscle they crossed. My temple, my scalp. "You act like what you did with your inheritance is nothing," he said. "Like anyone would have done it. But I wouldn't have. Grayson wouldn't have. None of us would. You act like what you're doing with your foundation isn't extraordinary. Or like if it is, it's because the work is so much bigger than you. But Avery, what you're doing, it's something. A Hawthorne kind of something. Everything. It's not just me, I told Jameson fiercely. It's all of us. He and his brothers were working with me on the foundation. There were causes Jameson had been championing, people he brought in to sit on the board. And yet, Jameson dragged the words out. You're the one with meetings today. Giving away billions, strategically, equitably, and with an eye to outcomes, was a lot of work. I wasn't naive enough to try to do it all myself, but I also wasn't about to coast on the blood, sweat, and tears of others. This was my story. I was writing it. This was my chance to change the world. But for another few minutes, I brought my hand to Jameson's jaw. It's just you and me, on this rooftop, at the top of the world in the base of a castle. It felt like the two of us were the only people in the universe. Like Orrin wasn't standing guard down below. Like Elisa wasn't waiting outside the gates. Like I was just Avery and he was just Jameson, and that was enough. I don't have meetings for another hour, I pointed out. Jameson's adrenaline-kissed smile was, in a word, dangerous. In that case, he murmured, could I interest you in some shapely hedges, a statue of Hercules and a white peacock? I didn't have to look back at the palace gardens below to know that they were still closed. Jameson and I had still this magical lifted from time place to ourselves. I smiled an adrenaline-kissed smile of my own. Elisa said to tell you no puppies. A peacock is not a puppy, Jameson said innocently, and then he brought his lips to an almost grazed mind, an invitation, a gauntlet thrown, and asked. Yes. With Jameson, my answer was almost always yes. Kissing him set my entire body on fire. Losing myself to it, to him, I felt like standing at the base of something much more monumental than a castle. And the world was big, and we were small, and this was everything. And Eris? Jameson's lips moved down my jaw, then my neck. For the record, I felt him everywhere. My fingernails dug lightly into the skin of his neck. I would never, he whispered roughly, confuse you for a saint. The morning after. There was blood on Jameson's neck, on his chest. It took me moments to realize that most of it was dry and another small eternity, during which time seems to stand still, to see the source, a deep cut at the point where his collarbone dipped in the front, right at the base of his neck. I surged forward, and as my hands went to the sides of Jameson's neck, I realized that although the deepest part of the cut was small, longer red lines traced his collarbone on either side, shallow cuts that gave his wound an almost triangular shape. Someone did this to you. I couldn't speak. The only thing that could make a cut like that was a blade wielded by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. A knife? The thought of someone holding a knife to Jameson's neck, that close to his carotid arteries, sent a chill down my spine. My voice still trapped in my throat, I skimmed my hands gingerly down his neck to just above the cut. I stared at the delicate rivulets of dried blood on his chest, and then I noticed his shirt. When Jameson had disappeared, he'd been wearing a button-up shirt, but now the top 4 buttons were gone, cut off, exposing the skin underneath. Jameson? I'd never in my life said a word that urgently. I know, Eris. His voice was low and hoarse, but he managed a rakish smile. Bleeding is a good look for me. Jameson was Jameson, always. The pace of my heartbeat evened out. I opened my mouth to ask Jameson where the hell he had been and what the hell had happened to him, but before I can get a single word out, I realized he smelled like smoke, like fire, and his shirt was smudged with ash.